This is Review Ed episode 12, recorded January 20th, 2012. The textbook revolution that wasn't. This episode of Review Ed is brought to you by Acceptly, college prep done right. Increase your chances of getting into the college of your dreams by 80% or more. Visit acceptly.com and follow them on Twitter at Acceptly. And by languagelab.com, bringing the world of English to you. Discover the future of online English language training and learn English in a virtual city. Visit corporate.languagelab.com and follow them on Twitter at languagelab. So hi everyone, it's Friday again and time for Review Ed with my knowledgeable co-host Christopher Dawson. So you know him from the previous weeks writing over at ZDNet about education and also working together with WizIQ. And for those of you in the audience watching the video, we are three of us, so for the first time, and I'm very happy that Dave Schappell, founder and CEO of TeachStreet, agreed to come on and be our guest on this episode of Review Ed and sort of being bombarded with questions from both sides, so from Chris and myself today. So very happy to have you on, Dave. Thanks so much.
I'm happy to be here.
As a
I'm a little I'm sorry to jump in. I'm a little distracted. I know it's not a real-time video, but the site was just down, so one of the engineers is bringing it back up again. Because of the snow, we had a power outage at our server facility, so I promise not to look over to my left too often.
And,
it's okay.
Well, we are not yet broadcasting live, so everybody on the recording will, of course, see that TeachStreet.com will be on and reliable as always. So, as a preparation for today's talk, I watched our interview or our talk from almost 2 years ago, April 2010, and we had a lot of the same topics. So we talked about Apple, iPhone 4, we talked about No and Chegg and Amazon, and just that you said, Dave, you were seeing at that time Amazon being the only like sort of probably competitor or big player in the textbook or e-textbook space, so maybe we have to adjust this opinion a little bit, but well, almost 2 years have gone by. So let's start, of course, with the big announcement, and we had about 24 hours to sort of let it settle, but Apple announced their cooperation partnership with the three big textbook companies, so Pearson, Houghton, Mifflin Harcourt, and McGraw-Hill yesterday in New York, and they have announced iBooks 2, they announced the iBook Author tool, and the iTunes U now as a separate app. And maybe let's go through each of the three sort of separately, and then of course the iBooks Author tool have somewhat created now the most buzz as more people looked into the user license agreement and found some not so nice things for let's say individual authors or publishers in there. So maybe first of all, the textbook announcement or e-textbook announcement concerns the K-8 or K-12 space, so not higher ed, as some of us, me included, have sort of first thought of. Then currently, from the publisher side, they said the $14.99 is their pilot pricing, whereas Apple in the announcement, I think, sort of wanted to make clear that for them is the maximum pricing. However, in the terms, I didn't find that they sort of put a limit on the individual textbooks, so I think we have to see. The three names I mentioned make 90% of the textbook publishing space. And sort of, Chris, yesterday I asked you just quickly, and you said, yeah, you were somewhat excited but wanted to talk with some more people. Today, are you still as excited as you were yesterday?
No. I wish I was, but there's some great things about this, and it's very clear that the textbook experience on the iPad is going to be typically Apple, just what we were hoping. Really a great experience, and part of a powerful ecosystem. That being said, it's more clear than ever that this is also typical Apple vendor lock-in, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, they already have a pretty decent foothold in the K-12 textbook space. And that's great. Right now the iPad kind of remains the tablet to beat. But when authors, let's think about this end user license agreement to start with. When authors send something in or submit something for publication in the iBooks platform, once they submit it to that platform, even if Apple chooses not to publish it, then it can't publish it anywhere else. It's done. You can have a great work, and Apple could just not dig it enough to put it out there. You can't publish this anywhere else by the terms of the agreement. So,
at least, as I understood, at least in the format, as Apple basically chose, as so often, their own solution, so not like EPUB 3, I guess is the standard for many other, but I think you can export it again as plain text. But, of course, all the formatting you had done previously with iBook Author is sort of being lost, and you had to start all over again. I think the only thing you could do is probably put it on your website for free or something like this. But I agree. It's very limiting, and you basically give away a lot of your power.
Intellectual property.
Yeah, as an author, I mean, those those terms or user license agreements, I feel that not only Apple but probably companies nowadays, they put in everything they can think of, and not necessarily if it comes to that this happens with somebody, that they would not necessarily decide to take consequences when the person is simply too small. However, having something in the agreement and going to more or less, I think, 48 pages for just installing this. What do you think about that, Dave?
I mean, who would do that? You'd have to be an idiot. I mean, you'd have to not value your time at all to publish. I mean, it's really egregious. It's not like it was slipped in. Maybe it was you, Christopher, or the other famous person who wrote yesterday. Like, they bolded it to make sure everybody was aware that if you used it, I mean, it's really offensive. I told you many times, I don't consider myself in the education space as much as most of your other interviewees are. I'm probably reading it more just as a consumer or as an observer, but I find it, I did read through all the links you sent me yesterday and more, and I actually just point blank found it really offensive. I found it really misguided. I think the only people that would publish in that format are going to be people that no one wants to read. And so you're really, basically creating content that's worthless, I think. So, I mean, let's put it this way. Do you think Pearson agreed to that agreement for the books there? And then there are 8 books.
I think the 3 got different conditions, definitely, yeah.
So, obviously. So, anybody that respects their work and invests in it, etc., isn't going to be subject to those terms. So they're basically just saying, we'll abuse the people that can't defend themselves, that no one actually wants to read. So,
Yeah, I think maybe for K-12 teachers, for a lot of them, it doesn't matter so much because they can go ahead and put together some content potentially that they can use with their students, and to create a platform like that is not a bad thing. But there's a lot more teachers now who have gotten a lot more savvy and who are putting together lots of really great things. And this move towards open educational resources, most teachers want to share these things that they're creating, and that's not possible.
This is typical Apple, and it's not going to work. I mean, 2 years ago, I think they sort of had the stranglehold, but Android devices are coming. I don't know what Amazon's formats are with those Android devices. They're coming, and a closed ecosystem isn't going to work for this stuff, in my opinion. I think that if you're somebody who's publishing respected work, I can understand that they might have pricing that they want to set differently, but if you're not going to want to double and triple your work to create your content, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I think most authors are going to feel the same way.
And I mean, the publishers, I don't think that Apple limits them, those people, those publishing houses to only being represented on their platform. So why should it be with individual authors? It must be, as an independent author, it must be your aim to be as visible as possible. And I mean, maybe unlike the music industry, textbook publishers are in a stronger position. It is not really that they were seeing so much pirating or that they had adjust that much like the music or maybe movie industry to the new times. So they didn't lose a lot of money. It has always been a very profitable business for them. So I think going into these talks with Apple and the negotiations, they were in a much stronger position that Apple couldn't ask for exclusivity or something from the textbook industry.
I think it's a really, really bad decision. I think people are seeing it almost through the wrong lens. Like, imagine if you used, I get the Apple products wrong, but if you used iVideo to create a video or a movie, and then you could only sell it through I mean, it's really absurd. I mean, if they hadn't bolded it, or if they hadn't bolded it, and it hadn't been specifically called out, you could almost blame it on a lawyer or something. I mean, it's obviously a specific strategic decision they made, and I think it's the type of thing that, it was the first post-Steve Jobs press conference, and I think you're going to see, these aren't little details. These are big strategic gaffes that I think you're going to see more and more of them now that he's not there steering the ship. And whether this may have been his goal too, but I think Apple's going to recant on this within hours or days. But whether they do or not isn't really as relevant for people that are really like Audrey Waters wrote, I thought, a really good piece on this, and in her Hack Education piece. I think they'll recant, but I think for people who really watch the space closely, like you two and others, they're going to have long memories about this. Like it shows very clearly the thought process and the respect they have for content creators.
Which is nil. That's yeah. I mean, this comes down to the bottom line. It comes down to, unfortunately, this lock-in, and yet, as you pointed out, there's 8 books here so far developing on this platform. Although, they did a little demo, and it looks really easy, to develop really compelling Pearson-level content. These publishers are putting in a lot of development time, which means that $15 a pop, that's not going to last either. There's a reason that's called out as their pilot level. When you're talking about companies that are charging $120, $130 a pop for Dead Trees, yes, it should be cheaper. No, it generally isn't cheaper yet. So there's a major issue with the industry itself. But to take a dive down to $15 a pop, that's just trying to seed a market. And this I hope will at least be disruptive enough that it drives forward competition. But I have a conversation about 45 minutes with the folks from No. Talk about how they see this platform and where they see their competitive advantages. I think that openness is going to be a big deal. And as this sort of open content movement really gets a foothold in education, Apple does have to wake up and smell the coffee a little bit. Again, iPads are $500 a piece. The server hardware to go with it, not cheap. They work well, but they're not the only alternatives, especially now we're seeing prices finally starting to drop. It took too long, but prices are finally starting to come down on the hardware. And schools are going to have to take advantage of that.
Yeah, for me, the big question is, of course, how do they want to get more iPads than the 1.5 million they actually have or currently have into schools, which is, of course, not in the idea of Amazon. Why should they want this? Then, of course, the rumors, when we have iPad 3, could they do the same thing with iPhone 4 and iPhone 4S, so making the iPad 2 considerably cheaper, or maybe giving more than the usual $50 off when an educational institution buys an iPad. On the other hand, we have, of course, this big talk that every textbook seems to have, on average, a life cycle of 5 years. Now you have to individually purchase the e-copy of a textbook per iPad, so the student, if they have the iPad, have to sort of take it with them and cannot either resell it or give it to the next class or generation. So will it really be cheaper? I don't know. For textbook publishers, it's a new distribution channel. Apple gets their cut of 30%. So the last piece to the announcement was the iTunes U app. Open educational content, or let's say content available on iTunes already, but now in a separated app, and with some LMS functionality. Chris, do you see it basically the same?
I do, and this is, it was funny when you mentioned, open content, because it's,
it's more
free than open, yeah. Stays in free beer, right? So, but I do think that adding the LMS functionality does improve things. As much as I would love to see, every classroom have a Moodle instance that they can be making use of. When it comes down to it, most teachers just need some basic functionality that they can use to manage the distribution of courseware. And this does provide that. So again, if you've bought into this ecosystem as a school, and a lot of schools have, and for good reason, I think, in many ways, then this is a powerful thing. And even students who just, most students at least have an iPod, right? So they can get the lecture on audio and make use of this on the web. So this is the LMS piece, though somewhat minimal, is I think headed in the right direction, and I think we're seeing this with a lot of services, that they're adding LMS-like features so that you don't necessarily need to worry about integrations, or you don't need to worry about having these other tools available or supporting other things. You can simply use a tool that gives you what you want and need, and then you have just enough of the LMS integrated so that you can do what you need to do and focus on the teaching and the content rather than sort of managing an LMS.
Right. From the voices I heard and read about yesterday, it was also the sort of most well-received of the three. And Dave, you worked for Amazon for quite some time, and how do you see sort of them fitting and maybe new ideas or initiatives coming from their side for the e-textbook space as well? I mean, now Kindle Fires and everything. I think they are going to establish themselves maybe with the next generation of the Kindle Fires then as really a vital competitor. Or how do you see it?
Yeah, I last worked there in 2004, so it's been a long time. I think just generally though, when I look at the Amazon homepage, I see, the technical term would be I see a shitload of Kindle. Mm-hmm. And so, that's the number one initiative, and my hunch is you're going to see more and more Kindles, formats, et cetera, and I don't think they're going to cede the book space or the textbook space. And I think their approach, I'm assuming it's sort of more open. I think the Android-esque open ecosystem is the better one. I don't think publishers like it as much. My hunch is that they won't, but I think the good thing is that I think the best thing out of Apple's announcement yesterday is if everybody just focuses on the best thing, which is just increasing the competition and the awareness of the e-textbook space. And, the higher qualities right now, probably No and Inkling and others, but, the best doesn't always win. Apple has a huge lead. I think Amazon has a lot of assets, and I have a feeling Google's going to still make a play. And, Barnes & Noble may not be done. They've done a great job with the Nook. So I think you're going to see, I think it's just really good. I think it's very much day one or day zero with the sort of tablet ecosystem. I think prices need to come down drastically to sort of $30, $40 range so that schools can adopt them en masse. They can become more disposable, and then they can start bringing in fluid, real-time content, social elements. And Apple's not good at a lot of that stuff. So, my hunch is that their approach isn't the right one for the masses.
Chris, you will be talking with No in just a moment. I just some weeks ago had the possibility to make an interview with Osman Rashid, and we were more talking about that textbooks need to become cheaper and their digital versions as well. And he basically said, well, just what Dave said, that we are at a very early point and we will see a lot coming this year in that respect of pricing as well. And basically what he was quoted on TechCrunch, that they will fight and we will see who has the better product. How do you generally see the No apps or the No e-textbooks?
I see them as more accessible. I see them as trying to bring some level of openness to the Apple platform, among other places, and ultimately, No is a software platform, not an integrated hardware and software platform. And I think one of the best things they ever did was leave the hardware business behind and focus on new and better ways of getting instructional materials to students in, whatever device they might have, sort of a device agnostic kind of way. Obviously there's a lot of room to do there, or room to move there, but, Osman Rashid said just recently that, No was always meant to be a software company. And,
I'm not so sure
that's
about
spin.
that.
I agree. It's spin. But spin or not, if the software is at the core of the whole thing, then that allows developers to really look hard at the cool things they can do with an e-textbook, not so much think about a particular platform, and certainly not think about having their content locked into that platform. It doesn't make for a terribly compelling case, and I think you'll see people and big companies buying into it because Apple does have a lot of reach right now and all sorts of cachet and a lot of popularity. If you go to conferences with teachers, even teachers who arguably don't make a whole lot of money teaching, they all have iPads, and when you walk into schools, when people are doing one-to-one now, they're rolling out iPads in a lot of settings. So there's a reason to jump into this ecosystem. That being said, I think that players who can move in that ecosystem, in Android ecosystems, on the PC ultimately, will have more success. I do agree with Dave that Amazon is really focusing consumer here. There's plenty of room for things to happen on the textbook side, but they have yet to really get it in terms of the textbook. Where they did their giant-sized Kindle, whatever it was, the Kindle Extra Large or supersized, and that was a dismal failure because of the technologies involved. Couldn't have there was no way to do a reasonable e-textbook. Even with the Kindle Fire, of course, now we have a small device because the goal is to keep the cost way down. So there's some more thought that needs to happen here, but I think this will certainly kick things up a notch, and Amazon, really being Amazon, is going to need to respond in some way.
Before we go into the next story about Know Me and their automated flashcards, let's take a quick break and thank our first sponsor for this show, Acceptly. Acceptly College Prep Done Right. Chris, did you give them a try?
I did, actually.
Okay,
yeah.
Tell us a little bit.
You know what? It's pretty cool. I've gotten one kid into school so far, and another one's working on it now. So I went ahead and created an account, and it's actually quite helpful, especially again given the fact that Colby and I are just wildly disorganized people. Something that sends a reminder, or sends a newsletter, or sends just some helpful suggestions in a timely fashion for, hey, you should be thinking about this now, or this is where you should be headed now. We're already pretty deep into the process with Colby, but it still is at the point where there's lots of things we have to kind of manage and be waiting for and looking for. Gotta say, this is a useful service, and especially for parents who maybe have not had to do this with other kids before, who are maybe managing far more applications for kids than we've just got a couple of schools we're looking at, or perhaps those parents who this is their first experience with college. They didn't go to college, but their kids are. This is not anything that they have a solid understanding of. I am all about Acceptly.
And you also, as a parent, have not the feeling that it may be too playful, but that is also serious about the tasks it gives you to sort of do during the week, and then move on to the next and get this done with the scheduling.
Yeah, I would say it's not so much playful as user friendly. I think it's all too often. I mean, if you look at the College Board website, for example, they have resources along these lines too, but they're not interactive. They're very sort of stoic and staid and corporate, and it's not the sort of thing that engages students well. And this really is meant to be a student centered sort of thing. It's the students should own this process, and it needs to be fun. So, because really it's a horrific process. So anything to lighten it a little bit and make it easier in a very sort of social feeling kind of way, that's never a bad thing.
So you can find them at acceptly.com if you have a kid going into college or soon maybe. And of course they are also at Acceptly on Twitter. And we want to thank them for their support of Review Ed for this week. Good. So then we have the next story, Know, and sort of I felt with the Apple announcement and what the platform has as features, what they did is that they sort of took a thorough look around what the other people, other companies before them have done and put this all together, and they were not really, maybe it's hard with e-textbooks, but I felt that there were not really new groundbreaking features, but that I had that I had seen everything at Know or Inkling or other players in the space. So, what do you generally think about the about this feature of automating or generally getting the flashcards generated for you?
Well, I think that it comes to this idea that we're at an early point in our ability to do response to intervention and have that happen in the context of sort of mainstream instructional materials, and be able to integrate, reinforcement and integrate assessment and these other sorts of things while you are using these new technologies. So I wasn't so much disappointed. I was actually glad to see things sort of being aggregated and put into a single interface. Again, Cengage is doing the same thing with their Mind apps. There's some that are groundbreaking, some that are not so much, but really at least it's all together in one sort of unified interface, and it does allow, it certainly hints at what will be happening in the future, I think.
Dave, when you have a TeachStreet account as a teacher, you for I don't know how long, but it seems forever, you get data and you see your performance, how your classes, how many times your classes have been seen last week, who clicked, who contacted you. Basically, you get a lot of data sort of behind the scenes from the TeachStreet team in an email, and of course you can access this. So 2012 or 2011, now 2012, will we see that almost all the important companies in education will focus even more on giving you data about either your performance, how you're doing, what sections you read, how long, and so on. Do you think that data for a company like No is also one of the key pieces, maybe?
It's what I was actually thinking when Christopher was talking. That No, and you made the point that I think they sent a feature list out yesterday based on what their competitors are doing. And probably if I was going to give No advice, not that they need it from me, I think they should focus on how many people are using their products. Apple is touting the 1.5 million iPads and these numbers. They have 8 books. And I don't know how many of them are actually being bought and sold and actually used in classrooms. My hunch is No is, orders of magnitude larger. And I think they should just focus on that. That's the key data point. Are students using their products? How are they using it? And what feedback are they getting from students and teachers? And I think they're in a really good position to win. I think with data for teachers, you could probably overthink things. Like I think Christopher made the point earlier, they need the simple, lightest weight things for LMS. I think from a data perspective, they probably similarly need the basics of how are students using it, where are they in the text, do they have questions, and do they have complaints? And the more complaints and feedback that they get, the more they can add in features that students want rather than matching the feature set of competitors. Because my hunch is a lot of that stuff isn't used or needed or wanted by students and teachers.
And No famously say that they are also about rapidly putting new textbooks out there, and currently say that they have 100,000 textbooks available on their platform. So that's quite a difference.
Yeah, sort of. I guess it's another one of those numbers that doesn't mean anything. Like whether it's 8 or it's 150,000, who cares? What you really care about is how many are being used and it's almost like the customer satisfaction score that a lot of the retailers tout. I think that's probably more important because No and Inkling and others have a much more solid strategy, I think, but they need to make sure that that strategy is translating into usage and happy customers, because I think that's going to be more important. If you look back 2 years from now in this conversation, I think that's going to be a lot more important as to who wins than even if Apple has 150,000 books in 6 months versus their 150. I don't think that matters as much.
That's a great point. And having been on the other end of trying to get teachers to make use of technology tools, particularly those in the area of data and summative and formative assessment, it's got to be easy, and it has to just kind of fall in their laps. So because they don't use it otherwise, unless it's these highly motivated, exceptional teachers who are really just embracing it. So yeah, keep it simple. I'd rather see scale and a lot of use than the world's most amazing interface. Mm-hmm.
Now, from the other end, sort of coming, previously being the textbook renter, but we talked about it, Chegg sort of spreading into other verticals, other segments, and they, based on HTML5, launched their new e-textbook reader. Chris, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, HTML5, as we well know, gets away from all sorts of cross-platform issues. And although there's some richness that isn't happening, some cross-browser stuff that hasn't been worked out yet, we aren't far from seeing sort of this surge of HTML5-ness that is going to be very useful. And if all of a sudden you can take what you do and make it readily available, whether you're looking at an iOS device or an Android tablet or a PC, again, that's a great step forward. And I think it's about time, because if we look at so much of the e-textbook content that's out there already, you either need a special viewer, or you need an app, or you need something, and to really sort of free those books, that's what we need. That's the next step that has to happen.
And the last story in that section, Wolfram, a story I more or less stumbled upon yesterday, as it was not so hyped, obviously, or 2 days ago, as it was not so hyped like the Apple announcement. But they also launched their education portal, Wolfram, more known for the Wolfram Alpha, so the Siri personal assistant on the iPhone 4S is based on. But basically, if you read the post saying that they want to bring out their vision of what free education and educational resources can be in a portal. So I guess just to sum this up, that many people, many players or initiatives, companies are coming from different angles and all sort of trying to give their take on or repairing maybe some aspects of this vast educational market or in the education system. And do you think, Chris or Dave, could this be interesting, what the guys at Wolfram are doing?
Well, it's funny, because I used Mathematica, a lot of years ago, and it was kind of my first foray into technology-enhanced learning, and it was pretty brilliant. But it wasn't so much the application that was cool; it's the fact that the way that the resources the teachers built were already being shared and published and made available, and that was a long ways ahead of its time. Long before social was a glimmer in anybody's eye. Wolfram Alpha was making sort of public and teacher contributions available to other teachers. And so here we go again, with a really a company that obviously gets this idea of platforms and sharing and some slick technologies. Now they're doing a portal again, an LMS-like thing, but without focusing on Wolfram and not so much focusing on the LMS. I think this stands a chance to be extremely interesting. It's in its infancy again, but this is one that I also read with a lot of interest.
But why are they flying sort of under the radar? It seems to be more for a certain group of people, and they don't really come into mass adoption, I feel.
Well, I think that, one, they do tend to fly somewhat more under the radar with things until they're really ready to roll. But they also have a core audience of pretty geeky folks.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that they are playing to that audience. So they're looking at the math and science teachers. If you look at the two courses they have available, it's algebra and calculus right now in beta. And, this is for those AP Calculus teachers who want to introduce some very cool resources for their students, not for the mainstream teachers looking for, yet another way to kind of bring in e-learning. It's a niche.
It seems to me a little bit more like an awesome counterpart to Khan Academy. It's somebody focused in not that Khan Academy is focused exclusively on math and science anymore, but just a set of rich tools that are available for a niche audience first, and it seems like they're going to keep adding verticals or areas of expertise and going really, really deep, but providing a platform that's a lot more open. Not sure how they pay the bills, but the content's awesome.
And well, the Nature Publishing Group has done the same thing with biology-related content, and they again have gone very deep, very thorough. They've done some promo about it, but really this is a resource for college level students or for advanced high school students, and they're pretty awesome. So similar idea.
Thanks so much for being here, Dave. Dave's company is TeachStreet, teachstreet.com, and also at TeachStreet on Twitter. Other ways to reach out, Dave, or is that basically
No, that's good. TeachStreet.com is probably the best place to go, always. It's where you should start, end your days, go there at lunch, and thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Great talking to you, David.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, bye.
All right, bye. So, Chris, we have a second sponsor for this show. Very happy to have the support of the guys of Language Lab, languagelab.com. I have known them for at least 4 years now as a company, and they were sort of the pioneers in seeing the potential of virtual worlds like Second Life, and therefore built their own world or town called English City, where you have everything like in a real city, libraries, supermarkets, an airport, church if you want, and you can talk with peers, so other students in the city, but also taking real language lessons with a then virtual teacher, but always native speakers, and immerse yourself in this virtual environment, meet with people, funny looking people sometimes, also exploring fantasy places, and but immerse yourself into this virtual world. And they have now added, I think, something which is very logic to do, adding business courses, but for specific professions, like for petrol engineers. So they build an oil rig, and they are now training companies on the oil rig, which is pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, great idea.
So everybody in the audience, if you think language learning is fun and have this experience of being in a virtual environment, check them out at languagelab.com, or tweet them at LanguageLab, and also thank them for their support of Review Ed. So we are very happy to have them as a sponsor.
Very good.
We in this episode of Review Ed, we have talked in another segment about no, and now you had the chance to sort of get firsthand the positioning of no and how they have received this announcement yesterday made by Apple. Can you tell us a little bit? What did they
absolutely.
say?
I spoke with their founder, Osman Rashid, and he's very, very upbeat, actually, and perhaps he's just very good at being upbeat. But I think he's hit on this, is that the Apple announcement is much more a catalyst for market education and driving forward competition than it is a huge concern in terms of a domination of a market. So no obviously has their iOS app, and you mentioned that they would be releasing an Android app soon enough. They have also combinations of native HTML ways of accessing their books. He specifically called out HTML5, just knowing that it's not quite rich enough, which is the same thing we've said at WizIQ, that we can't quite get that experience yet. But they have a flexible platform. Their market is much more higher ed than Apple's K-12 push, and Apple has always traditionally been strong in K-12, so it makes sense that there's some differentiation there. But more than anything, there is room in this town for the two of them and for other players. It's as he noted, what it comes down to is that the pricing of books is going to kind of come in line across these platforms. So it's not so much a matter of being able to compete on price; it's better being able to compete on product. So where's the experience that you like the best, or that's the most useful? Obviously, as we mentioned in the earlier segment, it looks as though the Apple experience is going to be an Apple experience. That's what they do. But really, No has their own sort of take on this, and I asked him why it's taken so long to get to this point. Why is it that we've had a lot of technology for a long time that would support the development of e-textbooks, and he said, point blank, that it's tablets, not iPad necessarily, but all of a sudden if you can't hold this thing in your hand and touch it and interact with it in that way, you're not going to get the experience. Which is why originally they were developing their own tablets, sort of before when the iPad was a twinkle in Steve Jobs' eye. Let's make our own so we can give students the experience they need. Well, now these tablets are becoming commodity parts, and it's more about the experience on the tablets. So I'm really excited to see where Noah's headed with this, and really more than that, on a larger level, to see where all these players are going to come into this market, because obviously the textbook makers are getting on board. We have some startups that are getting into it. We have some very large companies now. Apparently, I read yesterday that Apple is now worth more than Greece. So
maybe not so surprising seeing the
value of Greece, right?
Yeah.
But that's still it's interesting. Their market cap is larger than a country, which used to be a big economic power in Europe. So the point is that there's big players, there's little players, there's mid-sized players. There's just a lot of players finally, and I hope that means some real differentiation in learning. I think that the last point that he and I talked about, which again we discussed earlier in the segment, was the use of data, and I think that is maybe what's the most compelling differentiation they have. They introduced Know Me, of course, earlier this week, and Know Me and the other related efforts are more about giving students feedback and aggregating lots of data from anonymized users and being able to look at the student study habits, predict where they're going to struggle, even tell students that, well, hey, you study like this, and students who study like this tend to get grades like this. But if you change these study habits to do this, then you can expect better grades. And that kind of feedback, so we're kind of taking the instructors out of the loop in terms of providing immediate feedback, which is an incredibly difficult thing for instructors to do, especially in higher ed, and allowing the students to be empowered by that. I walked away from the conversation not worried about in the context of Apple's announcements.
Two takes from my side. I think you are right saying classically Apple are strong in K-12. However, I could also imagine, as I mentioned before, I feel the textbook publishers not being in a weak position like maybe some folks in the music industry were at the time of negotiations. So it might also be that they agreed to give Apple that part of the market first, but not agreeing to giving them everything they have, so taking higher ed for a later moment, negotiate again, seeing what's in for them, and in the end also seeing where are our e-textbooks are really selling. Is it on the Apple platform in this environment? Is it on Amazon? Maybe is Know the company for us to work together with and develop the e-textbooks? So I think they leave themselves open as many ways or streams as possible. Right. And I know that Osman Rashid, also with myself, he didn't want to talk too much about pricing, and I can understand. They are apparently making good business with the status quo. So why change something that's working for a company? From the consumer, the customer side, I would of course want to see more competition on prices in the whole market. But as you said, so many new players, exciting new things. Dave said we are day one, day zero, so we are very much at the beginning. So a lot of things can happen and will happen, I think.
Well, he did open up a little bit about pricing with me, actually, and that was also interesting. Not so much pricing for what they do, but noting that, and this is perhaps perhaps Chegg should be a little more concerned about this than anybody else. And there's a reason they're kind of differentiating their business model and expanding their business model. But when textbooks do finally start dropping in price, when e-textbooks that you subscribe to for a year, for a semester, all of a sudden can become compellingly inexpensive, then the used textbook market dries up very quickly. And that's as he pointed out. Publishers, even if they can charge much, much less for an e-book, they no longer are losing that money year after year after year on used books that they never see a dime from. So, there's money to be made all around here, and money to be saved by students, pretty easily. So it's a compelling case. It really is. It's about time.
And isn't it funny that because isn't Osman Rashid both founder or co-founder in Chegg and No? Leaving Chegg for No and having the sort of professional CEO, he explained to me as if he felt the startup phase of Chegg was done, so they needed somebody really building the business development, and he wanted to make his hands dirty again, and so founded No. But in the end, I think he has a foot in both companies still, so it will be interesting to see which one is it e-textbook applications for devices, or is textbook rental with spreading into sort of neighboring markets maybe? Right. Is this the thing? But
and like I said, there's plenty of room here for a lot of competitors and a lot of different ways of doing business. And, we see that as markets begin to mature and as people start thinking about things differently. Things just open up and opportunities are there to do things better. So, good stuff.
Great. Our last segment, 3 stories, 2 about money, in a good way. So let's start with these 2. LifeMocha set up their LifeMocha scholarship programs for schools affected by budget constraints, and there are certain or several conditions, but schools can apply. And of course, LifeMocha famously or a startup in the first sort of language learning community, then building also courses, working together with publishers. So they also spread from the original model and have evolved into something bigger now, but huge number of users and also well funded, and now with some of the funding or maybe the revenue, I haven't heard much about LifeMocha's revenue or even profits, but do you think it is to do something good or also to establish themselves as a player in the public education system and sort of getting a foot in the door, at least that their name is more well known, maybe?
Well, I think that Google took the same model with Google Apps, and in fact the work that they did by giving it away for free to schools not only kind of catapulted them into a lot of visibility, but they saw their paid business grow considerably, and they've evolved that model, and they've also used the schools as a test bed for a lot of stuff. When you give things away for free, people become a lot more tolerant of being in beta perpetually. So, what a great test bed. And honestly, if good things happen as a result of that, some philanthropic capitalism or social capitalism, that's fine by me. They do have a really great ecosystem, and for them to open that up to schools that could not access this, there are a lot of schools that are cutting teachers left and right, and it's awfully hard to justify making purchases in the technology arena when you're laying off physical teachers, a lot of physical teachers. Really, to keep momentum in the K-12 space, they really almost need at this point to be giving some real incentives to adopt. And if it's free, then schools have nothing to lose. There's also a lot of schools in this space, in K-12. You have a lot of teachers who are nervous. There's still this hesitancy to adopt technologies that are radical and transformative and different and potentially competitive with you as a teacher. So if you give it away, now we get people experiencing and realizing what a great supplement it can be and what a powerful tool it can be for students to enhance learning. No, it's a smart strategy, particularly since they already have a maturing and a relatively well-funded business, even if revenue is up in the air a bit.
As you said, showing to teachers how to enhance and how their own teaching can benefit from it. On the other hand, I think if you're a language teacher in a public school nowadays and you hear a lot of debates and support for STEM, but very few for language teaching, and I also heard that language teachers were the first, if you will, to be laid off. So why not, even if it's a company coming from the for-profit sector, but doing something for language education, I think essentially is a good thing.
You're absolutely right. It used to be the gym and PE and music teachers that got laid off first. Now there's this public outcry over gym, of course, because we have this giant obesity problem here in the States, and you can't get rid of music because we all know that it actually contributes to your math skills. So, language. Yeah, who needs language, right? Yeah. And of course, without the understanding that in fact, this is this global economy, and we've got just massive immigration and all these factors that mean that language skills and language learning and the cultural understanding that come with language learning is vastly more important than ever. That's a lesson that I don't think has been learned by too many school committees and administrators. So absolutely, anything to help that effort out a little bit is good.
I think it's a little bit pushed to a later stage that they can say, well, you can still take a course or a year or even two in college, and then that should be sufficient and enough to learn a language to an okay level. So do it later. You didn't lose anything, but we all know that the reality looks different.
Very different. Yeah.
And that leads to our second last story. A 100 million venture fund for traditional colleges. I know the Bertelsmann AG very well. Is one of the biggest German, not only publishers, but it's also a huge publishing house. And so what they want to do looks to me, after having read the article, very similar to what Tutor do for higher education. So basically analyzing programs that work in a traditional setting, set offline, and helping these institutions to bring these courses online in a compelling way. The twist may be that it's not only limited to the States, but it can be in the UK or even a European college or university. But otherwise, this line of identifying working programs and bringing them online, it doesn't sound very innovative, but in the end, this is what venture capital does. So it's an idea they understand, and we all know that higher education costs a lot. when we see our next story and last story, but yeah, 100 million sounds a lot. Did you receive it in a positive way?
I did, because I think that so often I continue to see over and over and over again traditional brick-and-mortar schools looking to either increase enrollment or make it easy for people to come back to school, go to school part-time, anything they can do to combat dropping enrollments and increasing costs. So they start having online classes. And 80% of the time, they're just dismal experiences, and they're a shadow of what an in-class experience could be. And that's not what it's supposed to be. And yet students are paying virtually the same amount of money to take these courses, but their online experiences are poor. And you can't just shoehorn content into a very different medium and expect it to work. There has to be an understanding of how to engage students when they're not sitting in front of you. And there's plenty of professors who don't know how to engage students when they are sitting in front of them, let alone when they're 3,000 miles away. Right. So honestly, if we can take the state of the art in online learning and advance it and bring the best practices from brick and mortar traditional learning to that, and come up with some new best practices and define some ways that this can work better, then that's I actually think that 100 million is sort of a drop in the bucket with this. I also think that as a venture fund, there's actually a fair amount of money to be made in this, and I think 100 million is a pretty reasonable investment if there's a replica model that can be pushed out to other schools and pushed out to a lot of schools, and essentially pull in any number of pieces of technology in which and curricula in which this 100 million gets invested. So no, this is I was excited when I saw this.
Our last story is a little bit not similar, but touches on this point of having three models currently: the brick and mortar classroom, the blended model, and the only online learning. And the Fordham Institute made a study and analyzed the cost. And I mean, they say that the cost is very individual, but to put some not price tags, but to put some numbers on it, so they have found that the brick and mortar classroom costs 10,000 per year per student, then 15% less, so around 8,500 for the blended solution, and not surprisingly, the virtual only or online only as the cheapest one, with what was it, 6,000?
6,000?
Yeah, something like that, a little more than 6,000. So, what do you think? How did you receive the use of this usefulness of the study, and what can we learn?
I think it is useful in that we need to get administrators, parents, school committee members, decision makers, policymakers thinking about the fact that money can absolutely be saved when you take away the cost of a school. I mean, the cost of just having that physical building is extraordinary, and the maintenance and every last piece of it, everything, right? And when you can replace all of that with a few smart IT folks, preferably outsourced because they do this all the time, and you're just one instance, then of course you can save money. The problem though is it's the same story as we just talked about. How do you translate good in-class practices to out of class, to virtual practices? And in fact, again, we look at teacher effectiveness, and there's lots of evidence that many of our teachers aren't as effective as they should be. So how do you take ineffective classroom practices and translate them into effective online practices? That's the bigger question. So it's great we can get people excited about saving money, but if they do that, they need to say, and the study is actually quite careful about explaining this, that so far our virtual experience with virtual schools has been mixed, and there's been some that have done well, some that haven't done well, many that have done very poorly in terms of our standardized testing and our ability to sort of measure this and what small ability we have. So let's get people excited about it. Let's get people thinking hard about new models that save schools money, save taxpayers money, make things happen well and efficiently in a post-recession world, or at least post-recession United States. But let's make sure that those cost savings go into pedagogy and doing this well.
Absolutely. Reminds me a little bit of our story last week about the charter schools and charter schools online, and sort of the sometimes missing framework or monitoring that takes place and doesn't take place, and what are the bullet points everybody has to follow. I think, yes, saving money is great, and a lot of people, of course, jumped at this in the first place. And I mean, as you explained so well, saving money when being only online is not a big surprise. But then how to actually make the experience valuable, make the experience great, and working on a good pedagogy, I think there's still lots to do. But having these opportunities is, of course, a great thing, and we have many also intelligent people who will eventually figure out how to really make a rich online learning experience.
Well, and what I'm hoping is that, no, you're right, and what I'm hoping is that as we see not only companies jump into this, but teachers begin to establish these best practices, that we will have this sort of replicable model. Same thing that hopefully we'll see out of the investment in higher education. And you know, right now, this is very new for most people, and there's a lot of people who have no desire to even touch this stuff. So there's lots of sort of work to be done on finding the secret sauce, and I think we've established pretty well in brick and mortar classrooms what needs to be done. It doesn't always get done, but I think we have a very good sense of what modern pedagogy should look like, and that's been well disseminated. But obviously, we're way too early to have something well disseminated. But if we can get this groundswell of enthusiasm, then I think it will follow. And I do believe that in online models, it's a lot easier to share videos of classes that have gone well, or share activities. When you have all these social hooks, you can't hit a like button in a physical classroom, but you certainly can share things that you're seeing on these online platforms in much more nearly viral ways. I think that we'll see this uptick in pedagogy, for lack of a better term, that can't be achieved in the same way in a physical classroom.
Let's give this a wrap here. I would say thank you, Chris, for being my co-host and contributing your knowledge and your ideas. It's always a pleasure. It was fun to have our first guest with Dave. So thanks again to Dave, and check out his company, TeachStreet. We thank our sponsors, Acceptly and Language Lab, and I'm already looking forward to next week.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.